Hello and welcome. This interview is part of a series I'm doing to publicize the 2023 conference of the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry. The conference is called CSICon, and it will take place in Las Vegas from October 26th through the 29th. Without further ado, let me introduce today's guest. I'll read the material from the CSICon speaker site. Dr. Eugenie C. Scott is the former executive director of the National Center for Science Education, a nonprofit that works to improve the teaching of science as a way of knowing, the teaching of evolution, and the teaching of climate change. A former college professor, Dr. Scott is an internationally known expert on the creationism versus evolution controversy and science denialism. She has received Lifetime Achievement Awards from both the American Humanist Association and the Center for Inquiry, as well as the Skeptic Society's James Randi Award. She also received the Richard Dawkins Award from the Atheist Alliance International. In 2009, Scientific American named her one of the 10 outstanding leaders involved in research, business, or policy pursuits that have advanced science and technology. She holds 10 honorary doctorates. And Asteroid 249540 Eugenie Scott was named after her in 2014. So welcome, Dr. Scott. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Rob. This should be fun. I'm looking forward to it.
So first, tell me about the asteroid. You're only the second person I've ever interviewed that I'm aware of. Maybe everyone has an asteroid, but anyway, I interviewed Andrean, and she told me about her asteroid with Carl. So what's the story with your asteroid? How did that happen?
What I can tell you about the asteroid is that it's up in the sky. I really don't know anything about it at all. The good news is it's not aimed toward us. So that
would be very bad if they gave your name to an Earth-destroying or civilization-destroying asteroid.
Precisely.
So how did you find out about it? Did you just open an astronomy magazine and there it was? What happened?
No, I was officially notified, but I understand. I'm not an astronomer. I don't even play one on television. I'm the farthest thing from anybody who stays up late, believe me. But I understand that when you discover an asteroid, you have the privilege of naming it. And there's a woman who apparently, very flatteringly, appreciated NCSC and the work that I did there. So she named it Asteroid Eugenie Scott. And there's a bunch of numbers that come after that. And I looked it up, and indeed, I'm happy to say, it goes around the sun, and it's not
no predicted intercept with the Earth.
That's right. But I was very flattered and very grateful. It was a very kind thing to do.
That is amazing. Yeah. So you mentioned the National Center for Science Education. So what exactly does that organization do?
It started out as an organization that defended the teaching of evolution in public schools. It helps teachers to teach evolution better, but also was an activist organization that tried to help parents who were facing a school board that wanted to make a really bad decision about the teaching of creationism or anti-evolutionism in some fashion. We worked with people in states to keep their state boards of education from passing down regulations and laws. And we also worked at the national level in terms of making sure that evolution had a proper place in the national science education standards and so forth. So it was a very wide-ranging national activist organization. But also it was important that teachers feel comfortable teaching evolution and teach it well, because that's the ultimate solution to this problem. We have to have people educated as to what evolution really is, as opposed to some of the mythology that they're told about, which makes them oppose its teaching. And then after 20 years or more, we discovered that teachers were also getting leaned on for teaching climate change. And we learned that it was pretty much the same pattern. You've got a well-accepted scientific position, which is being opposed for ideological reasons. Turns out the ideologies are different. In the case of creationism, it's a religious ideology. In the case of climate change, it's a political or economic ideology, but it's still an ideological opposition to a good science. So we use the same kinds of experiences and skills that we've learned in fighting the creationism fight for lo these many years to help teachers teach climate change as well. And just as a preview of attractions, hopefully this doesn't step on your line, but my talk at CSICon is going to reflect how, even though at NCSC and if you look at nationally, creationism has taken something of a backseat to climate change in terms of problems that teachers have, never completely went away. And unfortunately, given some recent Supreme Court decisions and looking at the state legislation that's popping up like so many little poisonous mushrooms around the country, it looks like there's some strategies that could bring creationism back as well. So my colleagues, I'm retired, as you pointed out.
Yeah.
My colleagues at NCSE continue to fight the good fight. And also, of course, incorporating the teaching of the nature of science itself, since that's extremely important, and important that teachers have that, how does science work? What is critical thinking kind of approach as well.
So, yeah, all right. So let's talk about your CSICon talk, since you brought that up. Let's see, from the website from CSI, it says, they're back. Here come the creationists again.
Rob, you're not pronouncing that right. It's supposed to be they're back.
and you have a question mark. Here come the creationists again. So that's scheduled for Friday at 2:30. And let me read the official description for folks. So it says, after a series of court cases, including most recently the 2005 Kitzmiller versus Dover intelligent design trial, creationists have mostly abandoned organized campaigns to teach creationism. Teachers still are approached to de-emphasize or omit teaching evolution, but the concerted efforts seen in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s largely have ceased. Then in June 2022, the Supreme Court decided in Kennedy versus Bremerton that a high school football coach was permitted to pray on the 50-yard line and overruled an earlier Supreme Court case, Lemon versus Kurtzman. This changed the ground rules in the seemingly perpetual struggle to keep good science in and creationism out of public school science classes. Legislation is starting to creep in. Alas, creationists may indeed be back for another run in the schools. So yes, so you're going to intertwine let's see, the religious aspect and also specifically intelligent design creationism, and maybe also the, as we talked about before, teaching against climate change?
I'm probably, it's only going to be like 20 minutes or something. So I don't really have a lot of time to get into the climate change thing, but there's a lot of anti-science legislation going on that affects the teaching of science in public schools. I just want to, I'm going to give people a picture of where things may be headed. And it's sort of a heads up, keep your eyes open in your state, coming soon, hopefully not to a state near you, to keep your eyes open for possible legislation that again, nibbles around at the teaching of good science in the public schools. It can occur through the creationism route, which is mostly what I'll talk about because that's what I'm good at. But it also affects the teaching of science in general. There's some legislation that's popped up in the last few years that, for example, inhibits the teaching of controversial issues. And controversial issues are defined as issues that are mentioned in political party platforms. By the way, it wasn't that long ago that one of the major political parties in the United States had the teaching of creationism as one of their party platform planks, and we're all for it. And so that could pop up again, but there's other stuff that goes on in party platforms that affect the teaching of science as well. A lot of these controversial issues policies are directed at like critical race theory and the teaching of history, those kinds of controversial issues. But science is not immune. And one of the provisions in at least a couple of these bills is that teachers have to present all sides of a controversial issue. Well, if you know anything about the creationism controversy and also the way it was manifested in the climate change controversies, you know that teaching both sides or teaching all sides means teach the standard scientific view and then teach the denialist view. The creationists, eventually caught on that they're not going to get anywhere by promoting the Bible because you just can't do that. Well, now the current Supreme Court is de-emphasizing the Establishment Clause in favor of the second religion clause in the First Amendment, which is the Free Exercise Clause. The First Amendment is a fascinating thing. The Establishment Clause says you can't promote religion. The Free Exercise Clause says you have to let people practice religion. You cannot inhibit the teaching or inhibit the practice of evolution. And so, the First Amendment has been interpreted that you should take you should take a neutral attitude. The government should take a neutral attitude toward religion, whatever the religion is, Christianity or any religion, the Hopi, anybody. But the current Supreme Court is somewhat of the majority is somewhat of the opinion that the previous judicial decisions have leaned too far on the Establishment Clause side of things and not strongly enough on the free exercise side of things. So, if you look at the kinds of decisions that they've been making over the last 10 years, really, they more often than not side with the with the Free Exercise Clause. And the Establishment Clause has taken a real beating. And this does not bode well for science education. Certainly not boding well for the teaching of evolution. And that's a little bit of what I'm going to talk about and what my colleagues at NCSE continue to pursue.
A few days ago, I actually watched a recording of Jerry Coyne, who's a biologist. He did a Skeptical Choir Presents talk. I couldn't catch it live, but I watched it just shortly afterwards. And he said something that interested me because I knew I was going to be talking to you. And his talk was not about creationism, it was about other matters. But there was a Q&A session, I believe, where this came up. And I'm going to paraphrase him, but he said something like, he thinks creationism is done and he doesn't worry about it anymore. And he's moved on with his battles. So, what do you think is on his mind there? Then I assume you don't agree with that.
Well, it depends on what you mean by done. If you look at the creationist movement around the country, yes, they have stopped up until now. They have stopped pressuring school boards and state legislatures to pass goofball legislation. There still is some, and obviously my NCSE colleagues are keeping track of it and keeping an eye on it, making sure that nothing slips out and actually gets passed. But stuff still gets promoted, but it's a great deal less. I mentioned that earlier. It's a lot less than it was in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. Especially, like I say, since Kitzmiller versus Dover, the intelligent design trial that we had few things to do with at NCSE. Ever since Kitzmiller in 2005, they seem to have kind of given up on trying to get into schools, but they haven't gone away. The Institute for Creation Research built a huge, much bigger and grander and more expensive museum in Dallas. They moved to Dallas from Southern California a number of years ago, and they have spent a great deal of money and effort to build this quite lovely new museum, which is, I'm sure, bringing in plenty of visitors. Answers in Genesis up in Northern Kentucky, they are expanding as well. They started out with the Creation Museum back in the 2000s. They added the Ark Encounter, which we of course call the Ark Park because it's such a good alliteration there. And they're planning some new exhibits. They managed to do all of this in cash. They never have to take out loans to build their multi-million-dollar operations. People support these museums. Those are the two biggest ones, but they're not the only ones. There are smaller museums all over the country where people are coming to these museums and learning that, oh, wait, the Earth is only thousands of years old. I wonder why they're not teaching my children this. Children, don't believe what you learn in school, because this museum here, very professional, with animatronic dinosaurs and the whole 9 yards. This is a very official looking thing, and it's telling me what I want my kids to believe. So yeah, right now, for the last maybe 7, 8 years, they've been pretty darn quiet. But there's no guarantee they're going to stay there, especially with this current Supreme Court crop. The conservatives on the Supreme Court have really leaned hard on the Establishment Clause. They're promoting the Free Exercise Clause. I hope they don't come back. NCSC's got plenty to do to improve the teaching of science education. The activist stuff is what kind of put us on the map originally, decades ago, but it's so much work. And if we can avoid it, that'd be great. So I hope Jerry can, I hope Jerry's right, but keep looking over your shoulder. These guys are a cultural force, even if they have not been a legal force, and they may once again become a legal force.
So one of the things that's not in the description on the CSICon page that I found fascinating, I would have put it there if I was writing it. It says on Wikipedia that you coined the term Gish Gallop. So for people who don't know, can you explain what that term is and how did you come up with that?
Well, I came up with it with experience with the creationist, young Earth creationist debater from the Institute for Creation Research, Duane Gish. And Duane Gish was this fabulous creationist debater who just wiped the floor with 99% of the scientists that he went up against. And the reason why he did it is because he knew how to debate. And he appreciated from the get-go that debate is a sport. It's not a way to exchange information. It's not a way to educate people. It's a sport, and the object is to win. Winning defined as persuading the audience that your point of view is superior to that of your opponent. Now, you do that not necessarily because you can drone on about molecular biology the longest and most accurately. You do that by being charming, by being funny, by establishing a rapport with your audience, and by having the affect of being a good guy. And Duane was really, really good at that. But then he would also engage in a rhetorical technique, which is how I named the Gish Gallop, of basically spewing out this huge quantity of little factual bits of information in a formal debate situation, which the evolutionist debater had no hope of being able to counter in the amount of time available. This results in what you can call the residual effect in terms of the audience's reaction. The audience hears Dr. Gish, and he had a PhD in biochemistry from the University of California, Berkeley, not a Bible school, a real legitimate institution. So he's got credibility, right? About that at some other time. But so Gish would get up there and he'd say, evolution didn't happen because of meteoritic dust on the moon. Evolution didn't happen because there are gaps in the fossil record. Evolution didn't happen because of because of radio halos in granite. Evolution didn't happen because natural selection isn't strong enough to produce body plans. All right, now it's your turn to debate. So you get up there and you say, here's why Gish is wrong about meteoritic dust on the moon. Here's why Gish is wrong about radio halos. But you're out of time now, so you don't have time to deal with gaps. You don't have time to deal with the, point B, C, D, E, and F, all the other kind of little that he threw out at the audience. And so the audience says, well, I guess Dr. Gish was wrong about the halos and he was wrong about the dust on the moon. But he must have been right about the gaps in the fossil record.
Because that wasn't countered.
It wasn't answered, and there's no way possible to answer. So it doesn't matter how much you know about the science. If you're against a Gish Galloper, you are going to be starting out your climb up the hill 10 feet in the ground, because the audience is going to be left with this residual understanding that the other guy's point of view is stronger than yours. This is not something that just happens in creationism and evolution. You see it broadly in the climate science debate, and boy, do you ever see it in politics.
Yes. So, all right, a little bit about former CSICons that you've attended. I actually, for the first time, met you in person at, you were dressed as RBG at the costume party, I believe it was in 2017, right? And what was the RBG? It wasn't exactly what the initials stand for?
Oh, I was dressed as, I was wearing a black judicial robe. I was dressed up as Ruth Bader Guinnessburg. And I was carrying a 6-pack of Irish beer, and I was Ruth Bader Guinnessburg.
Guinnessburg. I knew there was some twist to it. Ruth Bader Guinnessburg. That's right.
Yeah, I'm afraid puns run in the family. I haven't spoken at CSICon for a couple of years, but I actually called Barry. I mean, Barry's invited me, and quite honestly, I've encouraged him to go with some of the younger members of the organization. We got a deep bench here in skepticism. We don't have to keep going to the septuagenarians for speakers. We we can get, showcase some of these younger people. But this last year, I wrote Barry and I said, I actually might have something worthwhile to talk about this year. And so he said, yeah, come on. So he was very
cool.
nice to invite me back.
Are you going to be able to spend the entire time, including the costume party again?
Yeah, I can. I wasn't always staying for the full meeting, although certainly I stayed at more at more CSICon meetings than a lot of the other conventions and conferences that I attended, because yeah, these are my people, right? These are my kind of folks. So I will be, I'm retired, so I have the flexibility to do things like that now. So yeah, I'll be staying for the whole meeting.
And is
I
your
guess I
costume?
haven't thought about a costume yet.
Yes, I was going to ask, it's going to be another pun, or
I should hope so.
I'll
Yeah, I
be
have to work on
looking
that.
forward to finding out. I haven't
Okay.
decided what I'm going to do. So yes, you're retired, but I actually heard you have something interesting that keeps you busy on occasion, which I don't know anyone who else is a beekeeper.
Yes.
I actually caught a Skeptic Zone interview of you while you were in the hive with Richard Saunders. It was freaking me out just listening to it. How did you get into all that?
Well, I got some very good advice from a friend of mine when I was getting ready to retire. And he said, there's going to be a tendency for you to just want to kind of keep chugging along with what you have been doing. I mean, this is generic advice to anybody. He said, you're already good at this. Try something that you're not already good at. Try something new, something that is completely foreign to you, and see what you can. It's good for your brain to try to master new stuff.
If I made a list of 1,000 things, Eugenie, to do, I would not come up with beekeeping.
Well, my next door neighbor has bees, and she also has chickens. I think bees are a gateway drug to chickens, but that's another thing. I just remember a number of years ago, I was off at a potential donor for NCSE. We had a reception at his house, and this was like in the early 2000s or something like that. And he had bees. I had no idea people could have bees in their backyard. This was really? And so I got, I thought, boy, that'd be something that would be fun to do. And then when the neighbors moved in and they started keeping bees, I thought, I could probably do this. And then I retired and I thought, okay, by golly, this is something new. I don't know anything about keeping bees. And so I learned a whole lot about keeping bees. I became active in the Alameda County Beekeepers Association. When I actually don't have bees right this moment because I have a 3-year-old in the household whose mother is a little nervous about her blundering into beehives in the backyard, and she's becoming much more active in our yard these days. So my bees are on hiatus for a few years. I may start raising them again a few years from now, but Now I
Wait,
lost
so
it.
how do bees go on hiatus?
Huh?
Everything you say is tons of questions in my head.
Well, we can have a nice talk at the CSICon party
Okay,
about
okay,
beekeeping if you want.
okay. So one last question regarding skeptical items of bees. I'm constantly getting stuff in the mail, asking for money and donations to save the bees. And each time they're always, each one is different about what they're blaming, but it's usually they're blaming one particular thing in this email, another one's a different thing. And we need to stop this one thing and the bees will do better. It's like, what can you say about all that?
I think that'll be a talk that I would propose to Barry for next year's CSICon.
Ah, okay.
Because there are problems with bees, but basically honeybees aren't a real problem. Okay. There's a much bigger problem with native bees. I don't know how many people know, but the honeybee that provides you with your delicious honey at the supermarket or elsewhere, or the farmer's market, those are imports. Those are European honeybees and varieties of European honeybees, which are crossed and modified and so forth. They're an introduced species, and they're extremely valuable because they produce a whole lot of honey. Whereas native bees may or may not produce any honey at all, and they certainly don't produce, it's sort of the difference between, this is confusing, this is a terrible analogy, but a goat and a Holstein. A Holstein just produces so much more milk, and a goat produces a tiny bit of milk in
You're
comparison.
blowing my mind. I've never
Yeah.
investigated bees. I didn't know there was even a difference in the honey production. I thought all bees made the same amount of honey. That's interesting.
Nope. And there's like tens of thousands of native bee species in North America.
And
And
don't produce a
they
lot.
are getting crowded out, partly because of urbanization and so forth, but also because of honeybees. A quick little note, because it is a complex situation. It is a syndrome, not a single issue. Yes, pesticides are a problem. There are certain pesticides that are big problems, which is most of the fundraising appeals are for that sort of restriction, and those are not all wrong, believe me. But part of it is also lack of shall we say, proper animal husbandry. The big commercial pollinators, which are the main, most bees are not in people's backyards like mine. Most bees in this country are owned, and they're basically a type of livestock for pollinators. And the pollinators start off in California with almonds in January and February, and then they move down to Florida to pollinate some citrus crops, and then they go up to Maine to pollinate the apple crops. I mean, and these are hives of bees that are literally trucked all over the country.
Oh, wow. Another thing I didn't know anything about. Really? So when you first saying that, I thought somehow they're migrating on their own.
Knowledge.
Wow.
As ever, a fond of trivial knowledge. And so there's stress upon the bees, which also contributes to this colony collapse disorder. That is the problem that is generally attempting to be addressed. But it's a syndrome. It's a number of factors. It's not a single problem. And actually, partly because of the reservoir, as it were, of backyard beekeepers. The European honeybee in the United States, or the European honeybee in North America, is okay. But when I was thinking, okay, maybe this should be my talk for, if obviously Barry can say no, but I might propose a talk for the 2024 CSICon on bee pseudoscience.
Oh, I love it. Hey, Barry, it sounds like a fantastic idea to me. I vote yes.
Beekeepers are the best people in the world. They really are wonderful. And some of them have ideas that are just, that would kind of make a skeptic roll your eyes. And so I may talk about some of the zanier ideas that people have about beekeeping as well.
Are any of them in the line with like the birds are not real conspiracy theory?
No.
That bees are not real. They're all drones. They've been killed off, and now these are all drones. No. Okay.
Yeah, we ought to get the bees are not real guy for this CSICon. They seem to be having a
The
whole lot
birds are not real. He can make a spin-off. Bees are not real either. Yes.
Well, you know, if you think there's a lot of birds that have to be part of this conspiracy, just imagine how many bees there are. Because
They're smaller and they're probably easier to make.
one hive is easily 40 or 50,000 bees. Okay.
Wow, that would be an effort. The birds are not real. It's such a hysterical thing. I read some detail on that. They've got a reason for everything. Why they stand the electrical wires? Why are birds? Because that's how they're recharging. They actually the organization protested at Twitter. How dare they have the bird emblem because it's deceiving people.
Oh yeah, I love that stuff. I really do. Skeptics have to have a sense of humor. I mean, we really do. We're a pretty serious bunch, and we're dealing with serious issues, so we often take things pretty seriously. But sometimes you just have to stand back and laugh because those guys.
Barry needs to invite that guy for a talk. By the way, I mean that would get a huge draw, and it would be hysterical.
I would go. I completely would go to that talk.
So I know you're an author. Can you tell us about your books?
It's a short list. I wrote I think a pretty good book on the creationism and evolution controversy. It was published by Greenwood originally, and then the paperback by UC Press. But it was written to be a resource for schools, which is basically what Greenwood does. And they came to me and said, "Would you write this book?" And I thought, "Oh, that's probably a good idea." It's very useful because it presents topics that the creationists attack the evolutionists for. And so there's a creationist position and there's an evolutionist response to it. So it's I think it's a very good way to introduce yourself to the creationism and evolution controversy, because you get a very good idea of where the creationists are coming from. But also you're given context in terms of philosophy of science, in terms of the history of the movement, in terms of not just what science is, but also how scientists think and why the way we think about these issues is sometimes quite different from that in the general public. And it's called Creationism versus Evolution, or sorry, Evolution versus Creationism, and Introduction. The other book is a book that was edited by me and by my NCSE colleague, Glenn Branch, who did all the work, really. I mean, this is Glenn's work. Glenn is so great. And this is a collection of articles about the intelligent design controversy and the intelligent design movement. It's really a very solid introduction to the problems of intelligent design. And it is truly a slim volume. And it's called Why Creationism is Wrong for Our Schools. And it's well worth taking a look at.
Okay. And are you on the social medias?
I'm on Facebook, and I do check that at irregular intervals and occasionally even post stuff. Yep.
Okay. So with that, we can call it a wrap today. Thanks so much for joining me. And I'm looking forward to seeing you again in Vegas in October.
I am looking forward to seeing you, Rob. Thanks a lot for this very fun conversation.
Oh, thank you so much.
See you in a couple months.